Well, good evening, good late afternoon, everybody. I'm thrilled that you're all here. Thanks for coming. Scott, it's an honor to have you here. I'm delighted you accepted the invitation. Looking forward to our conversation.
Good, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Excuse me, Peggy took care of most of the housekeeping, everybody. There's just one thing I wanted to mention. If you see me checking my watch, it's not because I'm running out of patience, it's because I want to make sure we don't run out of time. Scott, I think, given that there are places you need to be and places other people here need to be, we should just jump right into it. So much, it goes without saying, has happened in the past few days. On Saturday, someone seemingly, a random 20-year-old, tried to kill the former president. Thankfully, Mr. Trump suffered only a minor injury, and of course, by Sunday, he was right here in Milwaukee already. Now, we are all trying to reckon with the aftermath of that act. How, as you see things, Scott, has that attempt on Mr. Trump's life changed the political landscape in America?
Erik, again, thank you for having me. And I'm old enough to remember the assassination attempt on President Reagan. I was a freshman at Yale when that happened, and May of 2001. I wasn't a freshman. May of 1981, and but I remember thinking on Saturday that it is incredible that a few centimeters have almost changed the course of history twice. So, look, I think that it energized the Republican side. I hope that we can have a bit more civility, the demonization on both sides, and the real thing that I was trying to imagine how horrible the days, leave aside for the Trump family, but for America and the world, how horrible the days would have been on Sunday, Monday, today, when we're supposed to be having this convention and formally nominating the president. What would our adversaries have done? Would it have been a game on cue for Hezbollah, for China,
for Vladimir Putin, perhaps?
Yeah.
Cutting to the chase, I suppose, and to the things that matter, certainly matter at a Republican convention when this party wants to get its candidate back into the White House. Has it improved President Trump's chances of winning in November?
I think almost assuredly. And I also think that, for better or worse, it's likely locked in President Biden as the Democratic nominee, which I think...
This talk of maybe swapping somebody into his place, you think is over now?
It's never over. It's never over when people want to win. But we study game theory a lot at my firm, and I think the problem now is President Trump has ostensibly gotten much stronger. And if you think about the other candidates other than President Biden, if I were one of the four governors, I wouldn't want to take on and energize Donald Trump.
Scott, yesterday, Mr. Trump picked J.D. Vance as his running mate, and Senator Vance, as you know well, because you know him, is considered a member of America's so-called new right, someone with strong support among the libertarian crowd in Silicon Valley and also on Wall Street. And he's anything but an establishment Republican. He's neither a free marketeer nor a globalist. He's perhaps better described as a populist, a nationalist, and an anti-interventionist. Of course, those labels are perhaps loaded with meaning. What to you does choosing Vance say about the likely direction of economic policy, trade policy, and also foreign policy in a next Trump administration?
Yeah, so for most of my career, or for the early part of my career, being a macro investor entailed a combination of being an economist and being a political scientist. And really, kind of after the dot-com bust, and especially after the GFC, politics disappeared a lot. And it was just the wall of money and the Fed and the central banks and the ECB. And now politics are back in the game. So I think it's an excellent question. And I think it shows a level of confidence on President Trump's part. Mm-hmm. I think it shows a desire to extend the America First movement beyond this election cycle, because I think that President Trump had choices. I think he could have chosen a younger heir apparent, or he could have chosen someone who's more like a prime minister to help him govern. And I think that he has brought in, a new generation. So for all those who've been complaining about the gerontocracy, you got a 30-something.
Well, to that point, after he was elected president in 2016, Mr. Trump filled the White House and his cabinet with Republicans from the American establishment, people like Rex Tillerson, for example, Jeff Sessions, Steve Mnuchin. Senator Vance is just 39 years old. What does his age signal to you about the character and the composition of a Trump White House and a Trump cabinet the second time around?
Well, the first Trump cabinet was, I think a lot of it was done on the fly. There was some experimentation. Rex Tillerson, no diplomatic experience, no governmental experience, CEO of Exxon. That didn't work out. Then Mike Pompeo, who was an old government hand, came in and was masterful as Secretary of State. So I think what we saw by the end of Trump 1 is more of what Trump 2 will be like. And I also think that there will be a lot more vetting and runway in terms of people who joined the administration. What I would point out is Trump 1.0, not unlike the Bush administration, was private sector heavy. Mm-hmm. The Biden administration is very lawyer, government heavy.
You moments ago described Senator Vance as the heir apparent. Is that to say he is Donald Trump's chosen one, as it were? If Trump is elected to a second term, the idea would be that J.D. Vance effectively carries the MAGA torch forward and runs for president the next time around?
Good. So thank you for asking me that question, because at the beginning of this, I was actually supposed to say I do not speak for the Trump campaign.
Yes.
The only people who speak for the Trump campaign's last name are Trump, Susie Wiles, Chris LaCivita, or Jason Miller. No one else speaks for the Trump campaign. So everything I say is my personal opinion.
An excellent point of clarification.
So, I think it's a major policy decision that President Trump wants to carry the movement beyond his tenure.
As you've explained briefly, you're an investor. That's at least what we know you as. That's what Key Square Capital is all about. You're a macro guy. Where do you fit in?
To what?
Well, to the campaign, to, as it were, the Trump orbit. You have been out there, so to speak, for the past several months talking about what economic policy under a Trump administration might be like, and that's certainly the substance of what we're here to discuss tonight. That's what I mean by where do you fit in?
So just to put in perspective, I've known the Trump family for over 30 years. My daughter's godmother's last name is Trump. I was very good friends with the president's brother who passed away. The president's former sister-in-law is my daughter's godmother. They have been around Donald Trump in New York for a long time. And I would say I made the decision to come out from behind my desk because I think when we talk about the future, I think we have two very different choices here. And I think in a way 2024, 2025, or this election cycle is the last chance for the United States to be able to grow our way out of this mound of debt without becoming sort of a European-style socialist democracy. We had tended to run fairly steady levels of government tax take as a percent of GDP, kind of 17 to 19%. Expenditures around 20%, and now we're bumping up around 23%. And I don't think it's sustainable. And I think it's important. One of the reasons that I become, I think, my total unofficial advisor and spokesman for the Trump campaign is, I think it's now or never.
You've helped to answer my next question, which is why. As I think you know, I know a number of your former colleagues and friends pretty well. Some of them are surprised to see you doing this. What motivated you to become a much more public figure in this capacity than I think it's fair to say you've ever been?
Yeah, look, normally, or
you're a pretty private guy, right?
Historically, my tagline was, "I want fortune, not fame." I'm the opposite of you. So, but you probably have both. So, I'm
thinking to myself, I might like a little more of the fortune part right now, but continue.
I used to teach economic history at Yale, and I think we're at a very important moment. I think that we're on the brink of a lot of things. The China relationship, I think we're in the midst of kind of a global economic reordering, and I would like to have a voice in that, either from the outside or the inside.
We'll get to that, but in the meantime, an unofficial advisor. Tell us a bit about your relationship with the former president, how often you've been spending time with him. Are you seeing him in New York? Are you heading to Mar-a-Lago? And a bit about what you discuss, what he wants to know from you, what you're offering up in the way of advice.
Yeah, I'm not going to repeat a lot of private conversations. I will tell you, one of the biggest misapprehensions, or as the president likes to say, fake news, about Donald Trump is that he's going to be prolific in a Trump 2.0. One of the first things he said to me was, "Scott, what are we going to do about these debt and deficits? And how are we going to get those under control without causing a recession?"
You believe he's dead serious about that?
I take him at his word. You're told to take him seriously, not literally.
So what have you advised him? What have you told him in response to a question like that?
Well, I said it's not going to be easy. I think that given the current situation, with a lot of the things that have gone on with fiscal policy, with monetary policy, I said, well, we're going to be doing you're going to be doing a mid-air refueling in a Cat 5 hurricane. So it's not going to be easy, but we'll go back to a lot of the things in Trump 1.0. And one of the things I said is I think a lot of people know that Donald Trump was very good friends or very close to the assassinated Prime Minister Abe. And the Prime Minister Abe had a program called the Three Arrows. And I have encouraged President Trump to think about the Three Arrows. So it would be cut the budget deficit to 3% by 2028, so the end of your term. He didn't get us here. He doesn't have to get it to zero, but get it on a good track. 3% real economic growth, largely through deregulation. I used the term with your colleague the other day, David Weston. I think we're going to have to re-privatize the economy, because this is a lot of government spending. And then the other three would be 3 million new barrel equivalents of energy from the U.S. So we produce about 20 million barrels a day now. If we up that by 15%, I think we could bring prices down and become not energy independent, but energy dominant. So,
well, in a way, America already is energy independent. It produces more oil equivalent than it consumes.
We do. We don't refine it, and we should be exporting it. We should be. The mischief happens with the Ayatollahs, with Putin at $80 or $90 oil. If we could push the price down to 40 or 50, it's still a very good living, and their treasuries are much less full.
I'm no commodities trader, but boy, a lot has to happen before oil hits $40 again.
Well, let's see what Treasury Secretary Yellen does between now and the election with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. She banged it pretty hard in 2022.
Are you suggesting, Scott, that economic policy gets used toward political ends?
I know it's hard to believe.
You've raised a few of the things that Mr. Trump might do if he were president again when it comes to economic policy and trade policy and foreign policy that influences both of those. He has talked about a 10% minimum for tariffs on imports across the board, or at least that's the implication. You might have talked to him about this. Would they apply across the board, or would they be subject, Mr. Trump being something of a deal maker, to case-by-case negotiation with various countries?
Yeah, so Eric, I think we go back on tariffs. The original tariff man was Alexander Hamilton. He loved tariffs. So why? Revenue for the Treasury and to protect American industry. Donald Trump talked about it during the debate. He has a third view. It's a negotiating position, and he also views it as a position of strength for the U.S. that he can use access to the American economy as a position of strength. So the 10% across the board tariff, the U.S. roughly now already has 2.2 to 2.4% tariffs. Big portion of that is about 19% on the Chinese. So, we could go to 10. I would think, and I think one of the misconceptions with the 16 Nobel laureates, with Bob Rubin, with Larry Summers, is that we would snap and do it on day one. I think we would get forward guidance on tariffs, and I think
they'd be phased in.
It would be phased in, and I also think that other countries would be given the opportunity to open their markets. So, to the extent President Trump uses it as a negotiating tool, so we are going to go from A to B over 36 months. It's your little red wagon. You can push it or pull it. So I think it's a very powerful negotiating tool for him, given the immense amount of credibility that he has in tariffs from Trump 1.0.
And what about China? What a blended tariff that you've just described at 19%, and I'm not going to. I'm assuming that that's correct. Mr. Trump has, I think, floated a 60% tariff on Chinese imports. Is that where we're headed?
Well, look, it's a maximalist negotiating position, and again, we may have a day where, in 36 months, there will be 60% tariffs, and Xi Jinping can decide what he wants to do, or that may just be a starting point. Right? But I do think that the U.S. looks at China differently than the rest of the world. I have recently advocated for different buckets with a variety of criteria, and it can also be the different items. Certain manufacturing processes, pharmaceuticals, are much more important for us to have a domestic industry. Footwear, textiles, probably less urgent. The comedian Dave Chappelle was very funny the other night. He was talking about even the comics have gotten in on China or Chinese tariffs, and he said, I don't know about you all, but I want to wear Nikes. I don't want to make them.
It's nice to be here in Milwaukee, not quite the geographic center of the country, but in many respects we're in the middle of America. People here do care about tariffs, particularly if they're in the manufacturing industry or if they have to buy goods that are provided from overseas. They also care about labor. They care about wages. What impact would Mr. Trump's plan to dramatically cut illegal immigration have on both the labor supply and wages?
So, a couple of things, because there's a lot to unpack there. I actually, for most of my career, we were told on Wall Street and just in general from academic economists that immigration does not affect wages. And now in the past 2 years, with kind of this unfettered immigration at the border, we say, oh, it does affect wages, and it's good. It's pushing down inflation. So therefore, we should have a massive line from Terra del Fuego all the way up to the Rio Grande, and inflation, we could have disinflation. I would push back against that because I think the U.S. has been in a productivity crisis for a long time, and I think that the immigration actually, the ability to import unlimited amounts of labor keeps us from using maybe advanced production techniques. So while you may get a short-term drop in inflation because of immigration, I actually think long run it's bad for productivity and bad for inflation.